Deion Smith, the transfer wide receiver from LSU. I'm going to be honest, John, I can't find a whole lot about this guy. But several folks, 3 or 4 folks in the Locked On Auburn Discord have been asking for thoughts on him for a few weeks now. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure that those guys know that I'm reading those comments. And so what do we know, if anything, about Deion Smith, the wide receiver in the transfer portal?
Well, yeah, Zach. I mean, had a nice debut at LSU a couple years ago, and has hit the portal a long time ago. And there hadn't been a whole lot of traction. There was initially a lot of SEC vibes. We heard
Sure.
Auburn, we heard Ole Miss, we heard Florida. 3 programs that are replacing a lot at the wide receiver position due to attrition, et cetera. So I do think those schools somewhat remain in play, but it's been very quiet of late. We did confirm that he's still in the portal. Got that confirmation earlier today. And we did confirm that there is still interest from multiple teams in the SEC, but there's some off the field stuff that has to be cleared first. I think we get, in the transfer portal, we're like, okay, he's available. Let's go get him and let's go through right now. But there's a lot of T's that have to be crossed and I's that have to be dotted, whether it comes
Sure.
to academics, logistics, other things that I think are still at play with Deion Smith. Now, to my awareness, the semester has ended at LSU, so those answers should be a little bit closer to arriving for
Mhm.
some of these programs. But it tells you a lot that they're still making those calls, right? It tells you a lot that they're still very interested in general. And again, we just talked about it with offensive tackle. When you talk about selling a need, I mean, it's those 2 spots, right? It's offensive line and wide receiver at Auburn. Obviously, they've already gone into the portal to bring in wide receiver talent with Zaylen Warsham, but you can always use a little bit more, especially as you go into the 2022 season with little, I would say, explosive experience on the
Right.
roster, and that's something we know Dion can provide. So I do think whenever everything's clear, he is going to have a lot of schools continuing to reciprocate that interest and say, hey, we still got a spot for you to come when fall camp begins, assuming those hurdles are cleared. And I think Auburn's going to be right in the thick of that if and when that happens. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot in terms of visits. We haven't really heard anything recently surrounding Dion's name,
Right.
but I do think that can and will change in the coming weeks and months as all those things have a little bit more clarity behind them.
Sure. And last story that I want to get your thoughts on, Roderick Robinson, the running back you and I talked about last week. His recruitment seems very fluid. He put out a top 9, which Auburn and some other schools weren't in that top 9. Then he put out a top 6, and it was like different schools that were in the top 9. So I mean, he's constantly listening to what schools have to offer, which is great. He just got offered by Georgia this week. How do you think that plays into anything?
Yeah, I was connecting with the Georgia source this morning, and I was curious. I was surprised, honestly, not because Robinson isn't great. And look, he's got ties to the South, all of that.
Sure.
But Georgia's, probably going to get Justice Haynes, in-state legacy, all that stuff.
Right.
Most people assume that he's going to Georgia, and then they're also in it for like the best backs in the country: Reuben Owens, Richard Young. So there's a little bit of curiosity surrounding that. Like, wait, is Georgia either slipping for one of those, or could they maybe be taking 2 or 3 backs in this cycle? And that's something that I think could be interesting from a business decision standpoint for whoever backs 2 and 3 are in that conversation. Doesn't always work out well when that's the plan. So it could be fluid also, right? Because it's only mid-May at this
Sure.
point, but certainly Robinson's stock is another that's certainly on the rise. He's got a top group that obviously didn't have Georgia in it. Now they've offered. So you wonder if he'll set up a visit. He did take his first official over the weekend to UCLA. Reviews are very positive after that, but they're always positive after visits, certainly official visits. Then
Sure.
the other school that he's been almost penciled into to a degree was Oregon, right?
Yeah.
There's a bit of a pipeline from his high school to that high school. But now Oregon is, trending up on the trail with multiple running backs, and they just got a commitment at the position from Dante Dowdle out of the state of Mississippi. So now, same thing with Georgia. You're like, wait, is there room, and or what's the plan, and how does that affect a kid like Robinson making a decision? So very interesting. I wonder
Yeah.
if he'll shuffle up his visits. He's another one that wants to make a summer decision. So I do think that will be interesting to see, when he does finalize and lock in more of the plans. Some of the other schools in it, Auburn, obviously, where he visited a ton of time with Cadillac Williams. He again, he's from South Carolina originally, so he understands the SEC appeal. I do think that's a big deal in this recruitment. So Auburn and Tennessee fans should be positive at this point. But obviously, when the national champs come in with that running back pedigree, it could and probably should shake things up, at least in terms of taking a visit, because when he made his SEC swing, it was Auburn and Tennessee. I don't believe he stopped in at Georgia. So wondering how that could materialize, but logistically not an easy thing to set up later rather than sooner, because he's a kid from San Diego right now. So it's hard to set those things up to a degree. So you wonder if behind the scenes there's some shuffling potentially going on. But either way, I think Auburn and Tennessee are going to stay right in the thick of that race. I think Oregon is going to stay in there as well. But again, Oregon and Georgia, you wonder how their recent momentum at the running back position could potentially hurt them with a kid like Roderick Robinson. So something to keep an eye on for sure.